Vet Resume Q&A today, and joined with Dr. Jennifer Cole and Dr. Katie Woodard. So Jennifer, why don't you tell us a bit about your career story and where all the great places you've been, because I feel like both of you have really interesting career stories, so we'd be really remiss if we didn't mention them.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start. It's a bit of a winding path. So as I just mentioned, I graduated from Penn in 2008 with all intentions of being a small animal veterinarian forever and ever. I got into clinical practice as a full-time associate and quickly realized that there had to be something more, because it just wasn't very fulfilling after about 12 months. And so I started looking, but we were at the height of the recession and really couldn't find very many positions. And I ended up working at my first practice for 4 years and happened to plan on a pregnancy when I was 30, and got pregnant with my daughter. And then both my husband and I found ourselves in a position where we had some flexibility. And I decided I was going to go the relief route for a while to allow me to kind of work around a pregnancy and work when I wanted to. And I tried my hand at some emergency medicine. And I did emergency medicine and relief in the greater Philadelphia area for a year, and had my daughter. And while I was on maternity leave, the opportunity presented itself that neither of us were locked into a contract anywhere. So it was time for us to get out of Philadelphia, and kind of pointed to a place on the map and says, "Ooh, this is a nice place to go," and landed in the middle of Pennsylvania in Penn State country, which is relevant to the story, and started doing local relief work here, working about 20 hours a week while also taking care of my first child. I then was pregnant with my second child in 2016, and found that one of the practices I had worked for, the owner was selling, and I wasn't interested in buying. And the other practice I had worked for had promised me hours post maternity leave, and those hours slowly disappeared. And it was kind of a kick in the gut. But one of the things that had always been nagging me in the background was there was something more. I had tried writing, I had tried some continuing education lessons. I'd always wanted to teach, but I didn't really think I had the qualifications. So I thought, well, no time like the present. I got online, I searched some of the local university advertisements, because we are the home of Penn State. And I applied for an adjunct biology teaching position, thinking, I'm not going to be qualified for this. And the odds were in my favor, and I interviewed. They liked me and called me the next day and said, "Hey, we want you to teach this biology lab," which involved me relearning a lot of things we forgot, like photosynthesis and things we don't do in vet med. They said, "And we also want you to teach human physiology." And I said, "Okay. Mammals are mammals, like, as long as you think I'm qualified." And I did the adjunct work as well as some part-time veterinary work for 2 years. The pay as an adjunct's not so great, but the experience was really worthwhile. And there was somebody who was retiring in my department, and I told my department head, I said, if there's a position that comes available, I want you to think of me. And she said, "Okay, well, we'll see." 3 weeks before the start of the fall 2019 semester, I got a phone call that said, "You can turn this down, but we want to offer you a full-time position because somebody quit. You have 3 weeks to prepare to be a full-time faculty member," which I'm not going to turn it down, right? So since then, I've been a full-time faculty member for Penn State in the Department of Biology, predominantly teaching human anatomy and physiology, but also teaching A&P for non-majors and biologic diversity. And I've been doing that for 3 years. I have yet to have a normal semester. They've all been marred by COVID, remote learning, but I love it. And I got involved with Melanie a year ago, maybe more. when we kind of crossed paths, I started a Facebook group that is dedicated to veterinary moms in government, academic, industry, and non-clinical roles. And because I see a niche. And so that's one of the things that I have pursued. In addition, I am in my fourth class of a master's program through Penn State in Homeland Security, Public Health Preparedness. And at the moment, I'm looking to get into One Health Education. So that's kind of where I'm at in a nutshell. I am still practicing small animal medicine. I'm full-time faculty. I am getting a master's degree. I'm on the Pennsylvania Veterinary Medical Board of Trustees. 2 kids, crazy life.
Awesome. Thanks. And I'm glad you could make the time to join us between
No
all these
problem.
things. But you know what I always see is that, if you want something done, you ask a busy person, right? So
Yes.
which is maybe it's a blessing and a curse, I think.
Mhm.
So Katie, maybe I'll pass it over to you to share your career story.
Sure. So I'm going to go way back. I grew up with show pigs, and that's really where kind of all of this got kicked off. So in middle school and high school, raising pigs for FFA projects, 4-H projects, and getting really comfortable with that type of agriculture, even though I was growing up just outside of Houston. Went to Louisiana State University, major in animal science, and spent a lot of time at their swine unit. They have a on-campus swine unit, so got a lot of good experience working there. And then after graduation, decided I needed to take some time off. Had thought I was going to go straight into vet school, but was really tired of school. So I got a job at the LSU vet school, working as an equine imaging tech. So I did that for a couple of years, and got to the point where I was instructing the 4th-year students on how to do their equine exams and their small animal exams, positioning animals for radiology, and really realized that I was teaching them, and if I was capable of teaching them, I was capable of going to vet school. So at that point, decided that I was going to apply to vet school. I only applied to St. George's. It was the only school that I was interested in at that point. I was newly married, just had been married a couple of years and had a 6-month-old when I found out that I was accepted to veterinary school. So packed my family up and we moved to the Caribbean, and got immersed not only in my vet education there, but in island swine production. So I, kept learning all I could about swine production, no matter where I was. Came to do my 4th year at Iowa State on the advice of several private practitioners dedicated to swine medicine. They really told me that I needed to either go to Iowa or North Carolina. So flip of a coin, I ended up at Iowa. Finished out my 4th year thinking that I was going to become a full-time swine practitioner, that I would be in barns and treating those animals on a day-to-day basis. Ended up spending some time at the diagnostic lab at Iowa State before I graduated, and was offered a postdoc position there after graduation. So decided that I was going to accept that. Stayed on at the lab doing a postdoc and helping a master's student complete her project as well. At that point, got hired in as a veterinary specialist, focused on client outreach and education. So I really kind of veered away from the day-to-day vet med and looked at helping vets in the field make better diagnostic decisions, submit to the lab in a better way, and really leverage what we could at the lab to make their lives easier. I am now a public health vet, still in the diagnostic lab, focusing more on molecular diagnostics now, but still holding that client outreach and education role. And had met Melanie through kind of lab meetings, of several years ago, and then reconnected when I had expressed some interest in doing resumes for other vets. I've always liked resumes and paperwork, if you will. And so really just wanting to help other people maybe get out of a position they don't want to be in, or explore what exists outside of clinical medicine.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, so we have such a broad breadth of experience among this panel, probably. And then, so I've been in the lab world, the equine world, and then now in not-for-profit and I guess public health and One Health style stuff. And then done some instruction at the university level too. So kind of, if you're here listening on Facebook, or if you're here listening, or if you're here watching live, just feel free to type in any questions, and I'm monitoring Facebook too. You're welcome to send me a DM if you have any private questions. And a lot of the people who registered tonight sent in pre-questions, which we circulated around to the panelists too. So maybe we'll jump right into the top tips that we might have, because we see a lot of resumes come across our desk. The reason that Katie and Jen were brought on was because we had a lot of resumes coming through, and we needed some additional people and some additional skill sets. So maybe Jen, do you want to start off with your top tips for resumes?
Sure. I have a few. I wrote them down, so I'm going to look off to the side so I don't forget anything. The first thing for me for our resumes is you need to really start thinking about your transferable skills. One of the things that I hear frequently is that I'm not qualified for this. And that couldn't be further from the truth, particularly in my realm. When it comes to veterinarians that want to break into academics, whether it be in a technical program, community college, or major university. A lot of times we're fooled into thinking that we need to have a PhD in order to be qualified, and it's simply not true. But we have so many transferable skills that we should have included in our resume. Client communication is essentially teaching. And it's taking very complicated material and breaking it down. So that is certainly one of the things that I think is transferable. Also, many university looking for CVs are looking for a lot of evidence of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And even if you're in a very homogenous neighborhood or area, we still deal with, as veterinarians in practice, a wide variety of people, even if they may all look the same, have a very different socioeconomic background. And so that is something that you can also focus on. So transferable skills need to be in your resume. One of the things that is probably my own personal pet peeve with writing is the use of the passive tense. To be needs to leave your vocabulary, particularly while you are writing cover letters and resumes. And so anything that has a to be root in it, we need to restructure to be a more active sentence. And a couple of other things. One is resumes don't necessarily need to be ordered in chronological order. Usually that's the most common way we see it, going from most recent to the past. However, some unique ways to organize a resume could be to organize it based on your experiences. Or major projects or goals that you've done within a company or within a practice. And on that note, you definitely want to highlight the things that you personally have done within a practice. Even if you're working with a team and you're coming up with something, a person who's looking to hire you is not hiring your team. They're going to be hiring you, so they want to know what you specifically can bring to their program or to their position. So those are just a few of the things I have. I'll see what Katie has to say, and then I'll chime in afterwards.
Awesome. Thanks. Go ahead, Katie.
Sure. I think kind of to echo Jennifer just a little bit, the first one for me is really those human skills. As veterinarians, we have a lot of training and experience working with people. And I think those get overlooked a lot of times on resumes. We tend to focus on our technical skills or the things that we've accomplished or that we're proud of, and rightly so. But we miss out on showing off our soft skills, working through problems, troubleshooting, especially as part of a team. That's really important. Um, Outside of clinical practice, a lot of industry jobs are collaborative. So you're going to be working closely with other people and really demonstrating those, instead of writing, works well with others, plays well with others. Explain it, in how, you've worked through, maybe there was a specific problem and the solution that you came to. That really helps to illustrate how you can use those people skills and those soft skills. And those are applicable no matter what job you're doing, right? The other one that I see frequently, especially from vets that have a little bit of a longer career, is being able to edit down what is appropriate for the position that you're applying for. If you've worked at a long list of clinics and you also have a long list of externships and internships and pages and pages, that can be overwhelming on a resume. And we really want to kind of pare that down to the targeted things that are most applicable to the job that you're applying for. We don't have to include your entire career. We can be a little more picky when we're selecting what to include on our resume.
Yeah, those are awesome. I'm going to give some tips that are a bit more broad-based, maybe. So one of the things that I see when hiring, when I've been on hiring committees and when I hire now, is that it is often hard in in your resume. I think what you want to think when you're applying for a job or a type of job is, how do I make it easy for this person to picture me in the job? So like, how do I make it really easy for them to see me fitting into their workplace? So if you have some idea of what it's like to be, if this is particularly applicable if you're going for a career pivot, but even if you're applying for a regular position or a position that you're well versed in and you've been in that type of industry, so whether it's in clinical medicine, you're applying for another job, it's really about how do I, and that, for example, this clinic or this workplace really values workplace culture, really values what, or DEI or something or other. It's helpful if you can showcase some of those skills or think, okay, so they can pick it out easily as they're reading the highlights. Because if they have a stack of resumes, now I know this isn't happening in clinical medicine where people are getting a stack of resumes anymore, but in most other positions, we are, like all of our colleagues who are in industry, they're still getting stacks of resumes from people. So standing out can be really hard, because literally if you're getting 25 resumes, the person hiring is probably not going to be able to pay attention and read every single line and be able to be like, I wonder how this person would fit in. I wonder, they didn't say that, but I wonder if, like, you probably have like maybe less than a minute to impress them and to really pick out the highlights and pick out the keywords that they might be actually looking for. So trying to look at the job ad and try to figure out where you would fit in and try to craft something that would make sense. So, and that doesn't mean that you have to spend like 12 hours writing your resume for every single job. It does mean that you have to look at, like, what kind of job am I applying for? If I'm going for a managerial position, then I need to start pulling those things out. And then the other piece is that a lot of people don't put a cover letter on. And I think this was an interesting thing we posted in the DVM project a few weeks ago. Like, always put in, my opinion is you should always put in a cover letter, even if it's a shorty, just so you can craft something else. And I also feel like it's probably just a sign that you're caring. So a lot of times what people will think is if you apply and you don't put in a cover letter, that you're just applying to a bunch of jobs and you don't necessarily, it's not tailored, or you haven't really given it a lot of thought. And that's probably not true. That's an assumption that they might be making about you. So, but even if you can have a generic cover letter that you would add in, pepper in some of the right keywords for that position, that really helps to craft your story and just to help them as well pull out, it also puts your attention on you for a little bit longer, because you've got this second page that looks a little different from your resume. And then hopefully it tells a good story about you. So I think those are some of the things that I often see, is that when looking at it as a hiring person, if you're looking at a bunch of resumes, it's hard to stand out and it's hard to pay attention for a long period of time. So trying to make it easy.
I think that it's very important, as you pointed out, to pick if you're making a career pivot, to pick a broad category that you want to tailor your resume and cover letter to. For instance, in a business setting, right, they may want a significantly shorter resume with a lot of white space on it. In an academic setting, they're asking for a CV, a curriculum vitae. They literally want all the words and your life story and all the committees and the projects and the things that you have done. Those can be a lot longer than 1 or 2 pages. And so it's really about crafting the resume or CV that you need for the type of position that you want. I would recommend using verbatim keywords in your cover letter that you saw in a job application. That's particularly important for government positions. If you're looking at USA jobs, your application has to get past kind of the bots and HR. And usually the only way that you do that is by using the appropriate keywords in either your resume that you're going to complete on USA jobs, or by using those keywords in your cover letter.
Yeah, I think I, agree with both Jennifer and Melanie that the cover letter is really the place where you can take that job advertisement and show them how you fit. That's your space to be a little more creative and explain how you meet the things that they're looking for. If they have certain qualifications or things that they'd like to see, you can really kind of paint yourself into that position. And that's a little more personal. It lets them know you more than just, your job experience on your resume.
I think even the importance of the cover letter is that it's the one way that you can personalize it, right? Anytime you can, make sure that you have the address at the top be to the hiring committee or if you have a contact, right? Just don't put to whom it may concern, but if you have a name or you have a contact, try to figure it out and personalize it. Finish up the cover letter with personalization. I will be a great fit for XYZ company, organization, industry, etc. I really look forward from hearing from XYZ company, organization. It's just one more way to show that you will go kind of that extra step beyond maybe another applicant.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and a question. So one of the questions that came in that's sort of related to that is when you're looking at how to make it personalized and how detailed, how detailed are we going to make it? So I know, Katie, you touched on that. So what level of detail should you include and what and how far back should you go? Those are kind of some of the those questions popped up quite a lot.
Yeah, I think as vets, we tend to be really detail oriented, and we want to include all of the nitty gritty on our resume. And while that is really important for a CV, like Jennifer mentioned, when we're looking at industry resumes, they're much shorter. They're maybe 2 or 3 pages, and you don't have all that space. So really it becomes important to hone in. They don't need to know every step of a procedure, right? They need just kind of a bigger view. So you don't have to get super detailed. However, you don't want to short sell yourself. So that is something that I do see people kind of going to the extreme opposite of being detailed, where they're too vague, and it's not helpful, or they're glossing over highlights of themselves and their career, where they should be a little more detailed. I think it is all about being really specific about the type of job you're looking for, and then picking out the skills and the job experience that you have that apply to that job you're seeking. You can cut things out that don't apply, and I don't think that there's really a time limit on that. If you have relevant experience that is older, still include it, right? Because it's a valuable part of your career story.
Yeah, one of the things that we do when we ask for people to come out to when the questionnaire that we have people fill out when they're coming in is we ask them to go all the way back to high school. And it's not because we're going to include their entire resume back to high school, but oftentimes people have things that they forgot about or that they thought, oh, it's just so long ago, but amazing experience. Or if you've had a prior career, or like, goodness, maybe you were like the political candidate for a certain area, but then people think, oh, it's just so long ago, I'm not going to include it. But we have some or awards that you might have won or activities you might have been part of that we can really highlight and showcase some of your skills. So it's really important to, it doesn't matter if it was 15 years ago, if it's relevant, as Katie says, you can pull it in and you can make a good story out of it. One thing I do want to add too is that sometimes we'll get people come and they will say, oh, I'd like to do my resume. But when we have a conversation with them, it's clear that they don't necessarily have a sense of where they want to go just yet. Or people might be feeling so burnt out or so like maybe disillusioned with where they're at right now that they have, we need to be able to craft a good story about where they're at. So while doing your resume is always going to be a good first step, and it's a great way to reevaluate where you're at. And it's important, you need it in order to take your next step. If you haven't figured out where you want to go, or you have no idea where you might want to go, or your general thought is, all I want to do is just get out of this situation right now, we have to craft some sort of story from it. So it's helpful if we can have, sometimes it's helpful to meet with a coach as well, or have some chats about that as in addition. So I just want to put that in there. Not that we would ever turn anybody away for resume reviewing, because it's often a really good exploratory practice to remind yourself as well of all the great things that you have done and all the skills that you have to bring. But sometimes, particularly if you're going to be taking the resume around and shopping it around for job interviews, the last thing you want to do is go in and be like, yeah, the reason I'm applying is because I just want to get out of where I'm at, right? We have to be able to have some sort of better story in order to get hired somewhere. And let me go back to our questions here. One question that we had is how to make a long career in one area exciting.
I think this is where you can highlight those individual events that happen within the career. I think we all understand that maybe the day-to-day doldrums of, talking, for the 5,000th time about puppy vaccine series or something like that doesn't sound that exciting. Particularly though, if you are looking for a job outside of classic clinical veterinary medicine, that stuff is exciting to most people. They find veterinary medicine fascinating at all levels. And so, you can take something like that, puppy wellness visits, and you can turn that into an individual experience that is a bullet point, maybe not chronologic, but established vaccination protocols, blah blah blah, for puppies, etc. And you can turn those kind of multi-year things or gradual changes that you helped affect change at a practice, and you can turn them into bullet points for things from a very long career. Also, it doesn't just have to be about the things that you've done in your veterinary career. I'm involved in lots of things outside of my veterinary career that are public service, that are volunteerism, that are kind of interesting and show a different side of me, that shows commitment and loyalty and seeing a project through and kind of a range, that you can certainly include that in your resume as well, if you feel like you're kind of pigeonholed into a 20-year career that you're trying to pivot out of. Use all the other things. If you helped with the Girl Scouts, if you volunteered at your church, if you were PTO president, all of these things are relevant life applicable things that you can put in your resume.
Yeah, and I think building off of that, a lot of times when I talk to people about, tell me a little bit more about your leadership and what that looks like. And they'll come back with, well, I'm an associate vet and I'm not, necessarily in charge of anyone. But then you start to talk to them about what they do outside of their career, and they are the head of Chamber of Commerce. They are active in their town's government. They serve as an officer on a parent-teacher organization or a school booster. And there's a lot of leadership there. And they don't necessarily pick it out right away. So thinking outside of, your career, and a lot of people are doing really valuable things that are not their veterinary career. And it's life skills, and again, those soft skills that we oftentimes forget about.
Yeah, and I'd say they're actually marketable skills, and they really add to our portfolio of who we are and how we can leverage into another area. And particularly if you are feeling a bit like you don't have other things to offer, it's a great question to ask yourself. And then it's also a great question to ask if you're thinking of making a change. What else could I, what can I take on that's going to bring me a lot of joy, but also would build some skills? Like, could I get involved in my local or my state veterinary medical association? Could I fulfill a role or, volunteer role that would be really fulfilling to me and not draining, but also, and would be within my bandwagon or my bandwidth, but also add to my portfolio of work. So I've not seen any questions here. So while people are thinking of questions, maybe what I will share is the process that we go through when we are doing the DVM project resume review. And Katie and Jen, let me know if you have anything to add in here, jump in. So typically what happens is that if you can set out a specific you've seen a couple job ads that you've liked in the past, if you can even screenshot them or just save them. When you come to you go through our booking site and book in with one of our resume reviewers at a time that works for you. We send you a questionnaire that's very detailed, and you bring together all of your documents from your life so far. So all of your accomplishments, we have fairly detailed things that we ask: what skills, what programs have you worked with, what skill sets might you have outside of vet med, all of these things that we've been talking about. And then you meet up with your resume reviewer, and you have kind of a detailed meetup where they kind of grill you a little bit, but in a nice way. And we go into and try and find some examples that would be really helpful to use in your resume to craft towards, and really get a sense of the person too, so that we can craft something that sounds like you and sounds authentic and real and like you would use in your lexicon of language. And then figure out where we make a, depending on which area of vet med or outside of vet med you're trying to go into, create an appropriate resume. So we create that. We do beautiful templates, I think anyways. And then we send it back to you in a Word document first, so that you can edit it, make sure it's language that you feel is right, make sure we've actually captured the correct experience that you've had, and make sure we're not overselling it or underselling it. And we've got the details right. You get a chance to send back your edits, and then we put it into a different program to create a beautiful template that's actually colorful, but not tacky colorful, like very classy and professional, but will stand out in a stack of resumes. And then you also get a chance to edit that again, and then that's where we end up. So most of the time, most people are pretty happy by the time we get to the end of our Word document, and by the time we put it into our template, you get both, so that if you have to apply via USA Jobs or some other portal, you can cut and paste, which is so important. You're not fiddling around with formatting, so it's just a plain text version, and then also this more formatted, stylized view that isn't a horrible, crummy Microsoft Word 1998 kind of template, which is very annoying to deal with.
I had two questions. One, I've seen some resumes that have things like pictures of the candidate and like a lot of color involved, and like maybe there's a statistic like boosted revenue by 10% over first quarter of the, so on, and like that is sort of like highlighted in a bubble somewhere, and they're very visually attractive, and they catch the eye. And I'm just wondering, how much do you see that in the stacks of resumes that come through? Like, are people actually doing that in the veterinary profession, or is it kind of still sticking with the, black and white text version?
Okay, so a lot of people are doing very boring resumes. And in academia, it's a whole different ballgame. Like, it would be like, they do want the black and white resume. So that's different in academia, where it's a curriculum vitae. That's a very different ballgame. But in other positions, using a classy but colorful or bold color is actually really appropriate and does look really, it does stand out, particularly if it's stylized and it matches with your cover letter. So it can be beautiful and you can have nice colors. You don't have to just choose something that's, again, like a Microsoft Word 1995 template. And it can be really nice, but it doesn't have to be, I don't think it has to be tacky in order to stand out and be colorful and show that you're a professional. But it, particularly if you're applying for, depending on what kind of position you're applying for, like let's say you're applying for a marketing position, you would expect that it would be attractive, right? In particular. And Katie and Jen, maybe you have different opinions, but we generally do provide a template that has, and we pop everything, you choose from a bunch of different templates that we have and we customize it for you. And then, but they do have color in them.
Okay.
Just to address one of the other questions you asked was about statistics or tangible numbers. If you can develop that, depending on what you're applying for, of course, that is terrific. If it's a CV, you want grant values in there. If you've applied for grants and received them, you want numbers in there. You want percentage of publications. If we're talking about maybe an industry job where you're going to be involved in sales, right? You're working for a food company, something like that, and you have evidence that something that you implemented at your practice is going to be was successful. If you can monetize that and put a number behind it, it carries a lot more weight than if you just say, oh yeah, and then we did a pretty good job selling XYZ thing. So anytime you can say increased revenue by 22%, or increased productivity, or even employee retention, all of those numbers can be relevant, completely dependent on what you're applying for. So I would say include it, and I don't think enough veterinarians include it because we're so scared of talking about things like money. That we kind of sell ourselves short with how creative and productive we actually can be. So yeah, if you have the numbers, create some stats, and I would include them depending on what you're applying for.
Yeah, it could be like savings that you've implemented, like if you've implemented a new protocol that saved time within the clinic, and that meant, if you do even the simple rough math, like that can really equate to a lot of savings for the clinic. Like we implemented a new checklist that saved us 15 minutes on every surgery, which means that on surgery days, we saved X amount of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. The other question I had was listening to your stories or the routes that you took to where you guys are right now, both Jennifer and Katie, and I'm sure Mel, you can relate to this. But like, I think we've all had that feeling that like, okay, I'm not qualified for that. Why would they take me? So I guess what are your words of advice for people who are in that mindset when they look at like a job advertisement and you're like, well, maybe I could, but no, I'm not qualified. Like, how do you get out of that to kind of make the plunge?
Who wants to do this one?
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
So I subscribe to this thought process, and maybe you're familiar with it. It's called power posing. So there is some psychology out there that you can kind of hot wire your brain based on how you physically take up space in the world. And so I always recommend people pick a favorite power pose. And just for, example, some of them are like standing like Superman. So really big, feet out wide. I mean, just stand there for a couple of minutes and then take some time to just jot down things about yourself. Maybe there are several things on the job listing that you're like, I don't know if I really meet that. So I recommend power pose, and then think about, okay, well, how have I maybe met these things that they're looking for? Whether that's, tasks that you've done or leadership skills that you have, and try and sell yourself to you first. And then once you go through that process for every qualification on the job listing, you'll have a long list of things to be proud of. And you can just read through them all again And then that really just exhibits to yourself that you have a lot of these qualifications, and to show them off and really not to sell yourself short.
Yeah,
I remember the power pose from Grey's Anatomy.
It's like the one time watching TV was helpful.
Yeah.
I
But
also feel
Jessica,
like,
I'm one of those people that I'm kind of a fake it till you make it person. And kind of that's like Katie's power pose, you just keep doing it until you really feel it about yourself. But I'm also somebody that still struggles every day with imposter syndrome. And I think that is something that's really common in our profession. And I'm surrounded by academics, right? That it feels like they're always so much smarter and more qualified. And but then I read down through my own resume. So if you go through the resume service, you can read down through it and you'd be like, wow, this actually reads pretty well. Like I look pretty good on paper, right? And and then and then you kind of have that moment of confidence, and that's just I all I can tell you is, as I've aged, leap. Like just do it. What do you have to lose? Some time, right? Pretty much. If you don't apply, you will not get a job. You will not pivot. And eventually something will stick. For me, I was very, very fortunate to find a department head who actually understood the education that veterinarians have, and was like, "Oh yeah, I have no I have no doubt that you can do this," and then getting in and doing it and doing a good job made a difference, right? But I think that you've got to just take the leap, and kind of prove it to yourself too, right? I'm always up for a challenge for myself, and so I kind of look at it that way. I'm like, well, if I don't do this, I'm a chicken, right? I can kind of talk myself out of it that way, and I say, well, I got to do this, because if I don't, I might regret this for the rest of my life. I don't want to be left wondering what if. And so that's kind of my mindset, and it's led me down some really crazy pathways, like pointing to a map and just moving. And but I do think that it has always been advantageous at the end of the day to just take the leap. You're not going to get out of your current situation if you let kind of that fear of not being adequate enough prevent you from actually getting out of the situation.
yeah, I think I will add to that most jobs, if you have written a job ad, particularly if it's a new position or if it's a position that they're revamping, sometimes it's kind of a wish list. Like you'll be like, yeah, I prefer that they have this qualification, and you're like, well, maybe they will, maybe this unicorn will exist. But in most instances, they're probably not going to find somebody who has all of those things. Like you're going to talk about and when you're writing a job ad, you write down all the things that you want them to do, and you write down write the responsibilities. But then realistically, like when they talk about like what all of the things that they need for you to do or be, unless you're talking about an academic position where it's very specific about what you actually have to have, like required qualifications. And even then, sometimes depending on the applicant pool, still apply, because you just don't know if they're going to, if it's even a required, if it depends on the applicant pool, because maybe they would take you or interview you with, even if you didn't have that requirement. So I think it's worth it. And the other part is that a good friend of mine reminded me that if you have 100% of the qualifications, you're probably going to be really bored. So, and if you can already do every single thing that the job is requesting you to do, then you might be bored after a very short period of time. So if you can do 80%, then you're probably okay to apply for it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you guys. I like that.
If I found a candidate, for example, that was like, could do everything except for like one small area that I knew that I could coach them through, and they were a good fit personality wise, I'd probably still hire them. Right.
Yeah.
So I think those are big pieces.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Good advice.
Okay. Well, here's a funny question that someone has messaged me. What's the most surprising thing you found on when you've been doing a resume review? It's the most surprising like piece of history that someone shared with you.
I have personally read some resumes where people overshare, right? Way too much personal information that shouldn't be in there. And I think that that's always surprising to me. And I tend to be a very open person, but not on the resume. So kind of leave your personal life out of it. Don't talk about, you don't need to talk about, if you want to, I guess you could, but I don't recommend it. Your family, your children, your ex-husband, right. The reason you left your last job, especially if it's a negative reason, leave all of that off of there. There are very diplomatic ways you can discuss these things in an interview. That doesn't belong in your resume or cover letter.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a very good point. Yeah, I think that's probably, the overshare is probably the most frequent thing that I've seen, or like the giving 8,000 reasons why they left their last job or something. I think that's probably the biggest thing. So, but we can steer around all of those things. So I'm going to post the link to the DVM project resume review page, and feel free to check it out. We're not trying to hard sell you. We hope this has been a really valuable evening for you. And